I'm going to talk today about digital strategies, and I'm going to share what is likely a very contrarian opinion, which is digital strategies make no sense. As brands, as marketers, as services, or product-oriented businesses, digital strategies, particularly in 2014, but you can go back to 2005, potentially even earlier, and I would argue digital strategy makes no sense. You should not have a digital strategy. How many of you have a digital strategy? Nobody's going to raise their hand now, right? So, right? I said you shouldn't have one. Nobody's going to raise their hand. How many of you have a social strategy? More hands. Interesting. How many of you have a content strategy? Few hands. How many of you have a wearables strategy? Not that many. I didn't expect that many on wearables. How about a TV strategy? Just one. A print strategy? One also. A radio strategy. Does that mean you're not responsible for those things? Or does that mean your company doesn't have those strategies? Shout it out. Not responsible. So how many of you believe your company has a TV strategy or has a print strategy or a radio strategy? I see some hands. All right, let's dig into this. What's my digital strategy? So I want you to think about what your digital strategy is if you said you had a digital strategy. Many more of you said you had a social strategy, probably because I didn't tell you that it doesn't make any sense to have a social strategy. It doesn't make any sense to have a social strategy. So think about your digital strategies, think about your social strategies, think about your mobile strategies as we walk through these slides. I'm going to show a quick video, and then I'm going to get into discussion. Have you seen this video before? I didn't create this video. It's the Shift Happens video. It's a number of years old. Some of the data is obviously therefore outdated. There are a number of revisions to this video with updated data, different takes on this, but I think it's a good video to set the context for our discussion. So I'm going to show this video quickly. Okay. So what does this all mean? Obviously, the video is a little bit outdated. Again, it's called Shift Happens. I didn't create it. It was created by, I believe, by a few IBM researchers a number of years ago. As I mentioned, there's some updates to this. I encourage you to go to YouTube and search for Did You Know or Shift Happens and watch several of those versions. But what does this all mean? Well, it means two things. There were two themes that underpinned this video. The first is that the market is evolving. People are evolving. How people communicate and therefore how brands communicate need to evolve. The other theme underpinning this was that technology is driving a lot of this. And the bottom line is that we live in a digital world, right? Years ago, much less so, but today we live in a digital world. We all acknowledge this. For those of you that are at an agency, this is probably one of the first few slides you share with potential clients when you pitch them, right? The world's changing. It's a digital world. Things are changing very quickly. I'd argue that to some extent, although they're changing, they're not necessarily changing as quickly as we think we are. But bottom line, you're not a digital marketer. You're a marketer in a digital world. And that's an important distinction. It seems like a play on words, but it's a very important distinction because if you are a digital marketer, you're going to write a digital strategy and you're going to attempt to execute that digital strategy. Within your organization, there's somebody responsible for traditional media. That traditional media may be split across a number of individuals, somebody responsible for TV, somebody responsible for print. There may be somebody in your organization responsible for social media, somebody responsible for mobile. If we treat each of these things as independent channels deserving of their own strategies, our job as marketers becomes very messy very quickly. And we don't need separate strategies for these channels. At the end of the day, they're just channels. They're tactics. Digital is everywhere, right? Would anyone disagree with this? No? Good. Has anybody seen these trash cans? Has anybody read about these trash cans? It was in the news lately. These trash cans were deployed throughout London recently. They track people as that foot traffic flows past these trash cans. They use the unique ID of your mobile phones and other wireless devices to track when you walk past these trash cans, and they were deployed throughout London. So the company that was collecting this data could literally follow people throughout London as they went about their day. At some point, likely not in the very near future, but at some point in a reasonable amount of time, everything will be wired, right? The Internet of everything. Devices will be wired. The one thing that's preventing that today is power supply. It's not possible to create and provide power to devices without three-prong plugs and large power supplies. As power supply technology advances, the power supplies themselves will become much smaller, and you'll actually have wired devices that are nearly invisible. So my point is, not only do we live in a digital world today, but our world is going to get much, much more digital. Some examples. Many of you are probably familiar with augmented reality, correct? Google Glasses. In fact, I created this slide before Google Glass was introduced, right? This will overlay information about everything in your world. In fact, there are now companies, Google is one of them, that are trying to integrate this technology with contact lenses. So you won't even have to wear a pair of glasses. If you already wear contact lenses, you'll pop your contact lenses in, or if you don't, you'll pop in lenses that don't have a prescription. They don't correct your vision, but they'll overlay some of this information. They may pop up your text messages as text messages come in. Or if you get a phone call, rather than pulling your phone out of your pocket when it vibrates or rings, it may show you the phone number and name of the person that's calling right in your field of vision. Another example, this exists in some markets as test case today. This is a billboard. There's nothing here intentionally, but in the very near future, as you're driving down the highway, wired billboards will be able to anticipate your approach. They'll know what kind of car you're driving, how old is it, what its service history is. They'll know your income level. They may know whether or not you've been online recently searching for a new car, and they will show you things like new car advertisements. In fact, they may show you a picture of someone who looks very much like you, driving your exact model of car with a message that indicates, we know you've been to the car dealer for service recently. Why don't you get off at the next exit? We have a special offer for you on a new car. Another example, how many people have seen this? It's a wired print ad. This print ad for RSA insurance in the UK as well actually allows people to enter their information on that keyboard. It's paper thin. They'll enter that information on that keyboard. They'll click a button and it will send that information wirelessly back to RSA headquarters for a quote. So things that weren't wired in the past are becoming wired. They're becoming data powered. So ask again, what's your TV strategy? What's your print strategy? I saw very few hands earlier. In some cases that was because the individuals in this room don't have responsibility for TV and print strategy. In many cases, in fact, in most cases, it's because companies don't have TV strategies. They don't have print strategies. They have brand strategies. Somewhere within the marketing department at some point, probably years ago, if your brand is going through revival, possibly more recently, somebody has written out, either internally or with an agency or in partnership with an agency, what your brand stands for. And that's the strategy that roots your TV execution, your radio execution, your print execution. But still, over the course of the past few years, many of us have been defining separate digital strategies. We create a strategy for everything. And it's actually become somewhat of a joke. So if we still have, I'll take the risk and see if we can pull this up. Who's seen this website? Who's got that as a social media strategy? You can raise your hand. Maybe not those exact words, but something like that. There's a site like this for digital. There's a site like this for wearables. There's a site like this for mobile. And each of the strategies is written exactly like this. When I talk to brands and I ask, what's your digital strategy? What's your social strategy? Almost always they will share something exactly like this. So if we all have the same digital strategy, we all have the same mobile strategy, we all have the same social strategy, why bother writing that down on paper to begin with? One of my favorites, and in fact, quite possibly the worst digital strategy I've ever heard, and there are companies in this market that are very well known that have this and are very vocal about having this as their digital strategy. That strategy is, and it's tough for me to even say that because it's not a strategy, but when asked what their digital strategy is, they will say mobile. Mobile is their digital strategy. And you'll ask again, so what's your strategy? It's a mobile strategy. What is it? Mobile? Right. Mobile is only a strategy if you're these guys. If you're a food truck, mobile's your strategy. You chose to make your food more convenient by preparing it in a truck in close proximity to your customers. There are a few other cases where, yes, mobile is a strategy, but mobile's not a strategy in most cases. It's certainly not a digital strategy, and therefore not a good digital strategy. And in fact, most of our strategies are bad. I scrolled through some of those social media strategies earlier. I didn't ask any of you specifically. I asked broadly, does this sound like your social strategy? I heard a few chuckles. Bright lights here, so I can't see faces, but there might have been a few uncomfortable faces. The strategies that we write are bad, and it's because we're forcing ourselves to write a strategy that we don't need. Here's another one. What's your digital strategy? We're going to have a one-to-one connection with consumers when and where our consumers are most receptive. Really? First of all, you're not going to have a one-to-one communication with your consumers, particularly if you're a larger brand. It's not possible. You can't fund that. If you're a small coffee shop on the corner, you can do that. You can do that on your Facebook page. You can do that via Twitter. If you're a larger company, you can do that with a handful of your consumers, but you can't broadly have a one-to-one connection with consumers when and where our consumers are most receptive. Secondly, Of course, right? If you take one-to-one connection with consumers out of this sentence, right, the balance of the sentence is about communicating with your consumers when and where they're most receptive. When are you ever going to communicate with your consumers when and where they're not receptive? Right? So this strategy provides no direction for those that you might put it in front of, whether they're internal organization or agency partners. In fact, when I see strategies like this written, most teams internally and externally just ignore it. Right? It's a given, it's a throwaway. It doesn't distinguish one brand from another. It provides no direction, right? Because the opposite of this is something you'd never attempt to do. You'd never attempt to have a communication with a consumer when they don't want to speak with you. In fact, you wouldn't be able to because they'd turn their back. Bottom line is these strategies are confusing. Having multiple strategies is confusing. The types of strategies we write in the digital space, social space, mobile, if you're writing a mobile strategy, they're just confusing. And it's time for brands to evolve. This is where we are today, right? So we talked about earlier, most brands do have a brand strategy, right? That's the story your brand wants to tell. Who are you as a brand? We also, most of us have digital strategies or social strategies, but it's time to evolve. It's time to evolve to the intersection of these two circles, right? So I've intentionally avoided a Venn diagram because that also has become a joke, or at least a three-circle Venn diagram. I just have two here. We want to be at the intersection of these two circles. The story your brand wants to tell certainly needs to be there, right? If you're going to communicate with consumers and grow your business, you need to communicate something about your brand, something about your business. But importantly, particularly as the world becomes more digital, we need to also consider the story our consumer wants to engage in. That word engage is what differentiates digital channels from traditional media channels. So I'll refer back to the RSA interactive print ad. If that had just been a typical print ad, there would be no opportunity for the consumer to engage with that print ad. The consumer would read, as many consumers do, the story that the brand wants to tell. However, it's a digital print ad. So for that company to be successful and deliver an ad that a consumer is going to engage in and build their brand, they need to also consider the story the consumer therefore wants to engage in. It's really about moving from my brand is, telling the consumer, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, to a statement about together we can. Together we can do something. If you engage with me, with my brand, in this way, we can do something. And that statement needs to have a clear value proposition, right? Otherwise the consumer won't engage. Needs to have clearly defined roles for the brand and the consumer, and this is important because it's too easy to just write a traditional media brand strategy that only has a role for the brand. And then lastly, it needs to be active and compelling, right? There needs to be a call to action. There needs to be some activity that we're asking the consumer to perform. And if we can write if we can write brand strategies or call them engagement strategies to differentiate from the brand strategies that we have today, and we can write them at the intersection of these two circles, we can apply those to all of our marketing. Write it in that way, throw away your brand strategy, throw away your digital strategy, your social strategy, your mobile strategy, your wearable strategy, and just write one strategy. And there's a number of benefits to that. So let's look at a few examples. Why not one strategy? Most everyone here is probably familiar with these companies, right? These are some of the companies that do digital particularly well, especially Red Bull. Coke is another one, Charmin. Most of us are probably less familiar with Harley-Davidson, but they're particularly effective in the digital space. But more importantly, they're effective in all marketing that they do. So let's focus in on two of these. First, Charmin, right? Because we're talking about evolving from a brand strategy to an engagement strategy. Toilet tissue is not something that we engage in very often, right? This is an example I use all the time because if you can engage a consumer with toilet tissue, you can do it with any brand, right? The only time we're engaged with toilet tissue, the only time we think about it is when you reach over and it's not there, right? Otherwise, you take it for granted. Coke is another great example. Coke is probably the best at this. And we'll take a look at these two examples in particular. So Charmin. This example I've had for a number of years. And Charmin's strategy used to be written something like, Charmin helps make life's most unpleasant moments a little bit more pleasant. If you look at some of what they've done more recently, so this was a social media post, "We've always been an Ask Guardian," right? They posted this leading up to the Thor 2 movie release. If you look at some of the things they've done more recently, it feels as if they've probably rewritten this to something like, Charmin helps you discover moments of pleasantness that might not otherwise have been discovered. But it applies to their product strategy, it applies to their marketing. So I'll talk through a few of these. Start with product. How many of you are well, I'm assuming most everyone's intimately familiar, at least with toilet tissue, maybe not Charmin, but Charmin has two products, red and blue. Who knows what red is? This is the engaging part, toilet tissue.
Regular.
Regular is red, but what's the functional benefit? What's the value? Strong. Red is strong. What's blue? Soft, right? Let's go back to the engagement strategy. Charmin helps make life's most unpleasant moments a little bit more pleasant. Let's talk about red. Why would you want strong toilet paper, right? So your hand doesn't go right through it, right? Most unpleasant moments a little bit more pleasant. Okay, got it. Soft, same thing. Nobody wants to be covered in lint, right? So choose one of the two. Talked about this social media tweet, right? They found something pleasant, something humorous, something delightful in a very run-of-the-mill movie release, right? It's just a very simple twist of words. And then if you look at how they engage around this, a consumer, I don't know if you can read this, a consumer tweeted, "Yeah, Charmin goes where most wouldn't," right, with this joke. And Charmin responded, "As toilet paper, that's kind of our job," right? They're finding these moments of delight, moments of pleasantness where you wouldn't otherwise expect them. And they're engaging consumers in a category where you wouldn't expect to be able to engage consumers in this way. Who's familiar with Charmin Potty Palooza? Nobody? So for several years, Charmin would literally take over Times Square in New York and around the holidays, and they would erect freestanding restrooms, large restrooms, right? Not porta potties, not the type of restrooms you might even find in a high-end department store. These were large restrooms. I don't have pictures here, but they had walls of toilet paper, literally an 8-foot bar with a dozen rolls, and then right below it, an 8-foot bar with another dozen rolls. They had hooks to hang your bags. And the reason they did it around the holidays is it's snowing, it's cold, mom's probably got one kid in her arm and she's dragging another kid, and she's got a couple of shopping bags tucked under her arms because she's doing holiday shopping and she's rushing from one place to another, and somebody's got to go to the bathroom, right? It's an unpleasant moment. You're rushed, you're trying to make a train, you're trying to make a bus, you're trying to keep your kids out of the puddle of brown snow, and somebody's got to go to the bathroom. You don't need to worry about, with Charmin, you don't need to worry about, if you're in this area, you don't need to worry about finding a restroom. The big signs, big marquees. You don't need to worry about, are they going to be out of toilet paper? Am I going to go in there and they're not going to have toilet paper and I have to search through my purse for tissues? You don't need to worry about what you're going to do with these bags, right? Because they have hooks for you to hang your bags on. You don't need to worry about what you're going to do with your second child and whether or not you can all fit into this bathroom. And you don't need to worry about whether or not the bathroom's clean, because another Procter & Gamble product, Mr. Clean, the attendants will come in and clean the bathroom after every use, right? So it's a potentially unpleasant time of the year, or at least moment, very pleasant time of the year, but potentially unpleasant moment during that time of year, and Charmin's there to help make it a little bit more pleasant. Same thing with Charmin Sit or Squat. Who has that app on their phone? One person? Okay. So it's a very similar concept. In fact, if I remember correctly, Charmin didn't create this app. They actually found a couple in Pennsylvania that had already created this app, and Charmin just partnered with them and rebranded it. The idea is You're driving somewhere, you're traveling somewhere with your family, somebody's kicking the back of the seat because they have to go to the restroom. You don't want to stop because if you stop for too long, you're going to get stuck in traffic. And if you do stop, is the restroom going to be clean? Is it going to be well stocked? Is it going to have a changing table? Well, Charmin Sit or Squat helps you find out. It helps you find a nearby public restroom that's going to be clean, that's going to be well stocked, and it does that by crowdsourcing and allowing the public to assign a sit or squat rating to the restrooms, right? So great example. And there's some traditional executions here, right? Event-based executions, there's some digital executions. If you were to fill up slides with many of the things that Charmin has done over the course of the past few years, you'd find that they're all very much in line with this engagement strategy. Coke. So Coke helps you share and celebrate moments of happiness in a refreshing way. Would anyone disagree with that? Right? In fact, happiness is in most of Coke's messaging. So let's look at some of the things that they've done. And some of these things have been, and I'll mix metaphors here, some of these things have been traditional digital, right? So things like what they've done in the social media space, or this is the Build a Memory campaign that's running right now with a Facebook app. Some of these things have been less traditional or more innovative digital. So those of you who may recall the Coke happiness machines, do you recall this? So this is a Coca-Cola, looks like a Coca-Cola vending machine. It's actually a Coca-Cola happiness machine, and this is a Coca-Cola happiness truck. So let's see if I can share very quickly just one of these videos. I'll share one and then explain the other. So Coke did that a number of times in a number of different cities, and obviously a great experience in person for those that were in the room, but also lots of mileage online with the digital video. In fact, these videos got millions and millions of views. Very consistent with this engagement strategy. This other example, to be able to engage many more people, they created a happiness truck. The way that this worked, and they executed this all around the world, is these trucks drove around, stopped. Curious individuals would walk up to the back of the truck. There was a big button that said, "Push me." You'd push the button, and at first people got Cokes, then people got pizzas, then people got snowboards, then people got guitars, right? And eventually there were crowds of people following this truck around the cities. So I call that innovative digital, very much digital. They're experiential. They're powered by, in this case, probably somebody cut a piece of drywall out of the wall that this machine was against and stuck a person in there, right? And it's probably an old Coke machine that had broken. In this case, it's a truck they already have. Build Your Memories, that's, as I mentioned, an online campaign that pulls from Facebook to create a collage of your moments of happiness. Share a Coke, again, getting back to product. Very much in line with share and celebrate moments of happiness. You've probably seen these bottles with names on them. And then this is a very simple Facebook post. Does this image make you feel thirsty or happy? And it's just well, they'll tell you what it is. It's a Coke plot, right? So again, there's no reason why we shouldn't have one strategy. No reason why we shouldn't throw away our digital strategies, our social strategies, our brand strategies, have one strategy. And in fact, there are very, very good reasons why you should do that. And these are some of those reasons. It's a digital world. We acknowledge that. We're no longer digital marketers. We're marketers in a digital world. If we're going to acknowledge it, let's act like it. Let's not treat digital like something different. Our digital strategy, social strategy, whatever you want to call it, isn't that good anyway? Talked about a couple examples. We're going to have a one-to-one conversation with consumers when and where they're most receptive. My digital strategy is a mobile strategy, right? Most of the time, our digital strategies aren't very good to begin with. We're only one brand. Why would we have a half dozen strategies? There isn't a digital Apple and a traditional media Apple. There's just Apple. Right? Our perception of Apple is based on all of their marketing. And all of their marketing needs to be consistent. Multiple strategies are confusing. Our briefs get too complicated. We'll have a brand strategy and a digital strategy, or a brand strategy and a mobile strategy. It confuses our agencies. They probably just ignore one or the other. Consumers don't even bother to reconcile them. It's not their job, right? They'll see multiple executions, and if those executions are driven by different strategies, they may not be consistent, and we're actually eroding our brand versus strengthening our brand because of those consistencies. So again, no good reasons to have multiple strategies, and in fact, several very good reasons to have one. So I'd encourage you, revisit your digital strategies, your social strategies, revisit your brand strategy, collapse them into one active strategy and call that your brand strategy, or if you want to differentiate versus where you are today, where you're just talking about your brand, call it an engagement strategy and drive all of your marketing off of that. Thank you.